On May 2, 2025, a humanitarian aid ship named Conscience, sailing under the banner of peace, became the target of a suspected drone strike in international waters near Malta. The vessel, carrying supplies and volunteers bound for Gaza, was struck with no prior warning. The attack caused significant damage, sparked fires aboard the ship, and left the international community reeling. There were no casualties, but the message was clear: humanitarian missions are no longer safe, even in open waters. In a world already fractured by war, displacement, and rising authoritarianism, this event wasn't just another headline. It was a warning. A warning that aid, compassion, and neutrality are no longer shields in the face of political power plays. The attack on the Conscience has reignited global debates: who has the right to intervene? When does defense become aggression? And what happens when humanitarian work becomes a battlefield? Today, we take a closer look at what happened, why it matters, and how this single event could shape the future of humanitarian aid, international law, and the ongoing crisis in Gaza. This is more than a news story. This is a global wake-up call. The Conscience was no ordinary vessel. It belonged to a coalition with a long and controversial history, the Freedom Flotilla Coalition, or FFC. Formed in the early 2010s, the FFC is an international network of human rights activists, non-governmental organizations, and solidarity groups. Their mission is straightforward: to challenge the maritime blockade imposed on Gaza by delivering aid directly, by sea. Their most infamous voyage took place in 2010, when the ship Mavi Marmara attempted to break the blockade. Israeli forces boarded the vessel in international waters, resulting in a violent confrontation and the deaths of 10 activists. That incident drew widespread international condemnation and elevated the Freedom Flotilla's profile around the globe. But despite the risks, the coalition has never stopped sailing. Over the past decade, their ships have carried not just cargo, but a message: that Gaza's humanitarian crisis deserves the world's attention. The Conscience was part of the 2025 campaign titled "For the Children of Gaza." Its cargo included medical kits, water purification systems, basic food supplies, and school materials. More than that, it carried symbolic weight, a defiant stand against policies that many believe violate international humanitarian law. But why go by sea? Supporters argue that traditional land routes into Gaza are heavily restricted, often subject to delays, rejections, or political manipulation. Sea routes, though perilous, represent an attempt to act independently and to pressure the international community to intervene. Critics, however, say the flotillas are political stunts that provoke conflict. They argue that coordination with Israel or international bodies would be a more effective, safer strategy. Some even question whether the activists on board are truly neutral. But those aboard the Conscience say their role is clear: they're not politicians. They're medics, teachers, students, everyday people standing up for what they believe is a moral imperative. Among the 29 people on board the Conscience this year were individuals from 12 different nations, including Norway, Spain, Malaysia, and the United States. Many had participated in past missions. One was a retired nurse. Another, a Palestinian refugee who hadn't seen Gaza in decades. They knew the risks. Yet they boarded anyway. Because to them, silence is not neutrality. It's complicity. And that's the message they hope to send to governments, to citizens, and to anyone watching. So when the Conscience was struck by drones, many viewed it not as an isolated attack, but as a direct assault on humanitarian expression. This was not just about one ship. It was about whether the world still makes space for nonviolent resistance. Whether aid, pure, apolitical, human aid, can ever travel without becoming a target. The Freedom Flotilla's story isn't over. And the Conscience might just become the new face of their movement. To understand why ships like the Conscience are even needed, we have to talk about Gaza and what life is like there under blockade. Gaza is a densely populated strip of land along the Mediterranean coast, home to about 2.3 million people. It's often described as the world's largest open-air prison. That's not rhetoric. That's reality. Since 2007, Gaza has been under a strict air, land, and sea blockade, primarily enforced by Israel, with support from Egypt on the southern border. The official reason? To prevent weapons from reaching militant groups like Hamas. But the impact goes far beyond security. The blockade affects everything from food to fuel, from medicine to mobility. Gaza's economy is virtually paralyzed. Over 50% of the population is unemployed. Electricity is often limited to just a few hours per day. Clean water? Scarce. Medical care? Severely limited. Many treatments and surgeries simply aren't possible without transferring patients out, a bureaucratic nightmare under the current restrictions. Aid agencies call the situation catastrophic. The UN has repeatedly warned that Gaza is becoming unlivable. But here's the thing, this isn't new. This has been happening for over 15 years. That's an entire generation growing up under siege. And while humanitarian aid does reach Gaza mostly through UN channels, it's never enough. The system is designed for survival, not dignity. People survive, but they don't thrive. That's where missions like the Conscience come in. They aren't just delivering supplies. They're delivering hope and making a global statement that what's happening in Gaza is unacceptable. But when even humanitarian efforts are met with violence, it raises a chilling question: is Gaza being isolated not just physically, but politically and morally? Because when we stop talking about a crisis, it becomes easier to ignore it. And that's what the Freedom Flotilla aims to prevent. They want the world to see Gaza. Not just in headlines, but in human terms. The attack on the Conscience wasn't just shocking, it raised serious questions about international law, sovereignty, and the future of humanitarian aid at sea. Under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, ships sailing through international waters, like the Conscience was, have the right to freedom of navigation. These rights are not granted lightly. They exist to ensure that oceans don't become lawless zones, where force and fear replace legal norms. The Conscience was a civilian vessel. It flew a national flag, maintained public tracking systems, and announced its humanitarian intent in advance. According to UNCLOS and other maritime protocols, such a vessel should enjoy protection, especially if it's unarmed and poses no threat. And yet, it was attacked. Initial reports suggest that drones, possibly military-grade, struck the vessel while it was still far from any national coastline. No warning. No interception. Just an airstrike in international waters. If true, this could be a clear violation of international law, not just because of where it happened, but because of who it happened to. Humanitarian actors, whether on land or sea, are afforded special protections under the Geneva Conventions and customary international humanitarian law. These rules exist to safeguard those offering help in conflict zones, not to make them targets. The implications go far beyond the Conscience. Because if one humanitarian ship can be attacked without consequences, what's to stop another? Could disaster relief boats, refugee rescue missions, or medical ships be next? And what does this mean for neutrality, one of the core tenets of humanitarian work? If neutrality is no longer respected, aid becomes politicized. Worse, it becomes criminalized. Legal scholars and human rights organizations have begun calling for an international investigation. Some are demanding sanctions or at least formal condemnation at the United Nations. Others are urging for stronger protocols to protect maritime humanitarian operations going forward. But so far, the official response has been muted. Some governments are cautious, unwilling to antagonize strategic allies or touch on the politically sensitive issue of Gaza. This silence is not just political, it's strategic. But for those on the Conscience, and the millions they represent, that silence is deafening. The world watched in shock as news broke of the attack on the Conscience. But the real question is, how did the international community respond, and how was the story covered by the media? Within hours, the incident garnered widespread media attention. Outlets from BBC to CNN covered the event, often highlighting the dramatic nature of the attack and the growing humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Some reports emphasized the boldness of the Freedom Flotilla coalition, calling it an act of defiance. Others focused on the geopolitical tensions surrounding the region. But while the coverage was extensive, the tone of the reporting was diverse. On one hand, many international voices condemned the attack on humanitarian aid ships as a violation of international law. Human rights organizations like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch quickly called for accountability, demanding an independent investigation into what they described as an unprovoked act of aggression. However, in some regions, particularly those aligned with or supportive of Israeli policies, the narrative was different. Here, there was often a focus on the security concerns of Israel and its right to defend itself against potential threats. Some outlets even questioned the intentions behind the Freedom Flotilla's mission, casting doubt on whether their purely humanitarian goals were as innocent as they appeared. Media reactions weren't just a matter of words, they had a direct influence on public opinion. In Europe and North America, the story sparked debates on whether humanitarian missions should be allowed to challenge blockades and bypass traditional diplomatic channels. In Gaza, however, the attack resonated on a deeper level. It wasn't just about the conscience, it was about the world's complicity in a crisis that has dragged on for decades. Many saw this as a turning point, one more instance of the international community failing to act when confronted with human suffering. Still, there was no clear consensus on what should happen next. Would this incident change the course of international aid efforts to Gaza? Or would it be just another tragic chapter in a long-running saga of political standoffs and humanitarian neglect? For now, the media spotlight remains a powerful tool, both for exposing the truth and for influencing policy. But it's not enough. For those who boarded the conscience, real change will come only when action follows the headlines. As the international community grapples with the aftermath of the conscience attack, one crucial question remains: what now? The assault on a humanitarian vessel, operating in international waters, cannot go unanswered. This is more than just an isolated incident, it's a warning sign that the existing framework for protecting humanitarian missions is dangerously fragile. For the activists aboard the conscience, the mission didn't end with the attack. In fact, it underscored their ultimate goal: accountability. They've called for an independent investigation into the event, demanding that those responsible for the attack be held accountable under international law. But accountability isn't just about finding the perpetrators. It's about ensuring that the structures that allow such violations to happen are dismantled and rebuilt. Several actions are needed in the wake of this attack. An independent investigation, the United Nations, or another impartial international body, must launch a thorough investigation into the incident. This will require examining not only the specifics of the attack but also the broader issue of maritime security and the protection of civilian vessels involved in humanitarian aid missions. Legal and diplomatic pressure. Countries that support human rights must exert diplomatic pressure on states involved in the attack. It's time for stronger legal frameworks to protect humanitarian efforts at sea. Governments must not only condemn the attack but take action to ensure such violations don't occur again. International solidarity, the global community must stand together in reaffirming the sanctity of humanitarian aid. This is about more than just Gaza. It's about protecting human dignity in all conflict zones, ensuring that aid reaches the people who need it the most, no matter the political or military situation. Support for Freedom Flotilla Coalition and other aid missions. Organizations like the Freedom Flotilla Coalition must continue to be supported, not just for their physical efforts, but for the moral stand they take in the face of adversity. Solidarity means more than just words. It means practical support for humanitarian missions, even in the face of violent opposition. This attack is a clarion call to reimagine how the world protects humanitarian aid workers and the people they serve. The international community must rise to the challenge. In the end, justice and protection for those who seek to help must be non-negotiable. After the attack on the conscience, the world finds itself at a crossroads. We are faced with a choice: to maintain the status quo or to demand real change in how we approach humanitarian efforts, maritime security, and international law. In the aftermath of such incidents, the natural instinct may be to turn away, to compartmentalize it as just another tragedy in a world full of them. But if we do that, we risk normalizing violence against civilians and undermining the very ideals of global solidarity that have held our international systems together for decades. Looking ahead, this moment demands a renewed commitment to humanitarian values. Change isn't going to come on its own. It will require the involvement of governments, organizations, and ordinary citizens who believe in the power of justice and human dignity. One key area to address is the international legal framework that governs the protection of civilian vessels engaged in humanitarian missions. The conscience attack serves as a stark reminder that these protections are only meaningful if they are enforced. International bodies like the United Nations must ensure that they don't just exist on paper, they must be actively supported and respected by the world's powers. Additionally, global diplomacy must play a central role in shaping the future of maritime security. Rather than allowing this incident to be buried in political rhetoric, we must rally together to develop new standards of protection for those delivering humanitarian aid. This means stronger protocols, clearer rules, and more stringent consequences for those who violate them. The role of the media cannot be underestimated in this process. The way the world perceives humanitarian work and the sacrifices made by those on the front lines is crucial. Continued media attention to this case and similar incidents will help ensure that we don't forget the real cost of political failure in war. Finally, the global community of activists and humanitarian workers must continue to stand tall. The individuals who risk their lives to deliver aid deserve our unwavering support. As we move forward, it's critical to empower these efforts, whether through funding, resources, or simply through the moral weight of our actions. The conscience attack is a wake-up call, but it also presents an opportunity to fundamentally change how the world protects those who are committed to making a difference. This isn't just about Gaza. This is about humanity as a whole. If you want to stay informed with the most recent news on global events and in-depth analyses, don't forget to like, subscribe, and activate the bell so you never miss an update. Share this video with others who should be aware of these important issues. Your support helps us bring you the latest developments as they happen. Leave your thoughts in the comments, your voice truly matters.